I'm Ben Summers, and welcome to the Shadow Banker's Secrets podcast, based on the book I wrote by the same name. As a boutique investment bank, there are two primary facets of our firm, the buy side and the sell side. On the buy side, we recruit asset managers that are able to generate objectively better performance than what's otherwise available through traditional markets. On the sell side, we provide the capital markets access to that performance through institutional-grade funds and private structured products. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Concepcion of Stratos Wealth Partners. He's got over 35 years of experience in the retail advisory space and is the host of the Evolving Advisor podcast. Jeff, it's great to be with you. Well, let's just dive in and start with discussing what you're currently seeing in the world of retail financial advisory.
Yeah, we've acquired, when I say we, at the enterprise level, we've invested in 7 or 8 firms and probably had a couple dozen of those close. If you're networking and the same way you would, if you're putting energy into it, the same way you do to develop clients, you're going to find nice opportunities. And that seller to buyer ratio is changing. We've got an aging population and it's going to flip. It will flip. And it's already beginning to. But it will flip in the next few years. So you're going to find way more opportunities, tons of sellers, not a lot of buyers because of the age of the industry. So there's an interesting inflection point that we're approaching, I think.
So when you say networking, right, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. So from our standpoint, if you want to get hit, you have to be in traffic, right? So I would tell you that probably in the last 48 months, barring COVID, I gave over 200 workshops on succession, valuation, and monetization strategies. And they were all sponsored by mutual fund and ETF companies and custodians. So I'm just out there as a thought leader, having a chance to share best practices and ideas, really for no purpose other than to educate. But when you're in traffic in that way, in every workshop, you're finding people that are interested in buying, that are interested in selling. And in a gentle way, when you're sharing ideas, it's a really great way to meet people. You get referrals from clients. So you could get referrals from advisors or from accountants or from sponsors or wholesalers. They know who's in traffic. And to your point, then when you're at these websites and some of this other stuff, there's just a lot of noise there and it's hard to make progress. So I think if you really want to get something done, you got to roll your sleeves up and find maybe more creative or grassroots ways to meet folks that could potentially be thinking about the future.
That seems to be the only way to really accomplish anything, right? Like if you're depending upon a third party, in my experience, it's very difficult, nigh impossible to delegate and expect any sort of valuable results to come of it. So when you talked about these workshops and the sponsorships involved, these are workshops that you effectively hosted, or were they you participant? What did that look like?
We were the speaker. So it would be mutual fund companies, ETF companies, that are looking to provide a value add for advisors. They're going to give a little update on their product, but then they'll have a featured speaker, and it was valuation, succession, monetization strategies. And we'd be in there providing that content, talking about what's happening in the market. How can you be a thoughtful buyer? How can you be a thoughtful seller? And how can you be a CEO, not an advisor, right? So are you building a business that can be sold, or are you building a business that's a lifestyle practice that you're extracting an income from? Because the mentality, the bookkeeping, the accounting, the reporting are very different on either one of those two things. And those were kind of the themes that we would speak around.
Understood. So you didn't even have to organize the event. You just speak at already established and sponsored events.
Correct. And it was great. And we gave great content. It was unbiased. We weren't promoting our firm. We were really sharing good content. So the sponsors were thrilled to have us. And it was a great way for us to add value and to make new friends as well and meet people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also it sounds like the type of content you were providing wasn't competitive with the sponsors themselves, right?
It couldn't be, nor could it be competitive against other platforms or folks who do what we do, because quickly we would be uninvited if I was using that as a soapbox to talk about our shop, which I never really did. I just wanted to educate.
Now, understood. So I operate in a similar vein. The challenge that I face is that the topics that I tend to talk about are basically shitting on other people's perspectives, right? And it's genuinely an educational talk, right? There's no pitch, but our perspective, our thesis is an affront to most people's existence. So yeah.
Sounds like a wonderful way to make friends and influence people.
That's me, right?
Yeah.
I run my business purely on personality.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So I guess diving in, a little bit sort of deeper. You're talking about again the marketplace for RIAs, the acquisition of such. Where is your current focus? Is it rolling up RIAs, or where are you currently focused?
It's a combination of things. I mean, our goal is to help people go independent. So it's kind of that overused term of breakaway brokers, right? So we have lots of folks that are coming from wire and employee models whose definition of independence, what they're seeking isn't necessarily real estate, HR, benefits, billing, regulatory. What they don't want is sort of top-down mandates, changes in compensation, restrictions on technology. So we let them be independent where they want to be and supported where, frankly, they would prefer to be supported if they could be. So that's a fairly large segment of the business, helping people go independent. Surprisingly, you use the word thesis. Our thesis when we launched the shop was really kind of the focal point. What we didn't realize is there were a lot of folks who'd gone independent and found themselves burdened by a host of non-client facing, non-growth oriented tasks that someone else could probably do better with scale. So probably a third of our population are folks who've gone independent and decided that they wouldn't mind supported independence or having help in some areas that weren't key to the client experience and relationship management. And then the other part's M&A probably. We spend a fair amount of time helping our affiliated partner offices grow inorganically and then doing some of that on our own as well. So it's a little bit of a mixture of those things.
Yeah, there's more to it than just signing up with RIA in a box, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think a lot of times people take for granted. Now, granted, they're paying a massive premium to some of the folks that they've plugged into in that traditional wirehouse model, but they take for granted some of the stuff that gets done for them to show up. And if we can do those same things and more that the other firms were doing for pennies, on the dollar cost, the model has resonated well. And a dozen years later, and 10 or 20 cities later, we've been able to build a nice model supporting folks that want to run their practices independently.
So when seeking out and recruiting new independent RIAs to work with, do you see a consistent sort of set of false beliefs that you have to overcome to have them engage you as a client?
Yes, it's a great way of saying it, and less so today, but still exists, right? Because if you sit at Mother Merrill or at Wells or UBS or Morgan, those firms, paying 45 cents on the dollar, have to tell you that you can't do what you're doing there. Because if you could, everyone would want to do it there, where they could have autonomy, independence, earn more, have a business that's worth more. And by the way, probably 15 or 20 years ago, that was true. But with some of the technology tools now and the growth that's taken place in the independent broker-dealer and custodial space, one of the myths is you can't do what you're doing here. And in fact, you can. And there's certain things you might not be able on the margin to do quite as well. But there are many things that you could do as well or better. And that's one of the key myths. Another key myth, to your point, Ben, is you get paid a lot, but when you absorb all that expense, net, you're not really further ahead. And that's not true at all. So if someone who sets up an RIA, a really well-run RIA, if they take the philosophy of paying themselves a salary and really creating an EBITDA history, which is important to growing enterprise value, they should see their net growing from 40 to 45 on the wire side up to maybe 65 or 70, depending on how well or how lean they run their business. So there are expenses, but net, there are also material gains if you're running the business well.
So what's interesting, when I said false beliefs, I was thinking in terms of, okay, I'm an independent RIA and I don't need help. And what it sounds like you're describing is it's false beliefs around leaving the wirehouse to just set out on their own. So once you've got RIAs having made the decision to go independent, at that point, do you find it effectively a laydown to have them engage you, or are there sort of additional false beliefs to cross that hurdle?
Well, you hit a good one right there. So we're talking to a shop. It's a nice size shop. They have 800 million in assets, and they're running on their own now. So they're contemplating bringing on a minority partner. That was a conversation we had with them. And then I think they came to the conclusion they're not loving some of the mundane stuff, the tech support and the billing and the regulatory, the compliance side of things. And they said, boy, why would we hire you? It's really, really expensive. I said, let's kind of talk about what expensive is against your revenue base and your assets. And the cost to use us as a platform, forget selling to us, was about $370,000 on the haircut that we take on their revenue. So I asked them, I said, this has come up multiple times, put me on hold. take as much time as the two of you want, and decide if you had that 370 grand, how many people could you hire? And just let me know. So they put me on hold for just a couple of minutes. They came back and they said, we think we could hire 3.5 bodies. And my comment was, well, it sucks for that half body, because I don't know if you're going to cut them in pieces, but okay, 3.5 bodies. And that's going to fill your regulatory, your compliant. If you joined us, you get me and my team and 82 or 83 other staff people. So do you believe that myself and 80 of our folks could do more for your organization than 3.5 bodies that you'd hire? And they're like, yeah, unquestionably, yes, because with scale, they just get so much more because of how we can staff our business and the stuff that we can provide them. The other thing that you can't take for granted in today's marketplace, Ben, is finding those 3.5 bodies. It's hard to find people. It's competitive. It's competitive as hell. Their war for talent was a grossly overused term, and I don't even think it ever applied. But the last few years, it absolutely does. So finding them and keeping them is harder. So it's 5 years ago, I'd have to assume that they could have found the 3.5 bodies that they would have gotten. I'm not going to give them that today. It's going to be hard to find them and to find really good people. So
I get that completely. So you alluded to a point just a minute ago about enterprise value, particularly EBITDA, right? So from what I've seen in the RIA marketplace, it looks like valuations are predicated largely on gross revenue, more so than EBITDA. So why the emphasis on enterprise value?
Yeah, historically, it was on gross revenue, but it really isn't today. And if someone tells you that, if it's anyone who has any sophistication as a buyer, they're telling you that because they want to tell you how they're going to invest in your firm in English, in the language that you understand, right? And most advisors understand some multiple of gross revenue. The reality of it is any moderately sophisticated buyer would never buy that way. And I'll just give you an example. So we're hillbillies in Cleveland, Ohio, right? So if I have a couple $1 million of revenue and I'm running my nice little RIA practice, and my cost of doing business, my staff costs will be lower, my rent costs will be everything will be lower in Cleveland, Ohio than it would be in LA or New York or Miami. So my 2 million of revenue at the end of the day could net me 1.3 million of earnings. So if you take that same shop doing 2 million in revenue and they happen to be in Manhattan or Miami or LA, they might only be netting 700,000 or 800,000 in earnings. I cannot pay a bank loan. I can't pay anything with gross revenue. I can only pay with net revenue or net income. So I think there's sort of a fallacy out there that if someone paid the same for that $2 million RIA shop in Manhattan that they paid for me, they've not purchased the equivalent. They've not so focusing on net income or EBITDA is really the only way that someone who's even moderately sophisticated would buy today. Although they might express their purchase to you in terms of a multiple of gross, no one with any sophistication would ever buy that way because they're either going to overpay, underpay. It's really EBITDA driven. What's my free cash flow? That's really the only thing that matters.
And it's shocking to me that we have to have a discussion about sophistication. We're talking about financial fucking advisors.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. It's the shoemaker, right? It's the shoemaker who's got his kids have got holes in their shoes. So advisors, the lion's share of them are acting as advisors and not CEOs, because if they acted as CEOs, they would think differently. They would finance deals. They'd run their own balance sheet and P&L differently. And this, I'm not saying it's a knock, by the way. They might be very good financial advisors, but there's a difference when you're doing that somewhere else versus actually running a sustainable business that's creating value that you can someday monetize, that could continue in your absence. And that's not always the case. There are some great operators, but the lion's share of folks might be really good advisors and candidly mediocre operators.
But can you really be a good advisor if you don't understand what a balance sheet looks like?
I think they understand balance sheets. I think the problem is this whole term lifestyle practice, right? They may understand balance sheets. They may advise their clients well, but whether or not they're running their own business with that same financial acumen, that's the part that I see is oftentimes absent. So it's not that they don't make a good shoe. It's that they're not wearing good shoes or making good shoes for their kids. It's, are they cooking for others? Or are they kind of eating some of their cooking as well in terms of how they're operating their own business and their enterprise?
Oh, fair enough. And I mean, I have challenges with advisors for different but related reasons, right? Like, as you probably know, we're an investment bank and a quant-based firm. And when we engage with advisors, we ask them to make merit-based decisions. And that's just a foreign concept. It's a religion, right? Things are done dogmatically without any conscious consideration of how or why, right? And yet
That's
they'll pay
dangerous. That's
well,
dangerous.
and as you probably know, that's commonplace, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, where do your services sort of end, right? We're talking about sort of back office stuff. Do you engage in help and consulting with respect to the advisory service itself, or is it simply running the business as a business?
Yeah. So we are a couple of things. We're a platform for folks who want to run a wealth management business without necessarily being encumbered by, again, all that stuff that's not really client facing: billing, regulatory, compliance, technology, HR, benefits, in some cases, asset management, to just anything that's really beyond sort of the client engagement and retention. We also have a practice management side of the business that's helping the advisors think about where they are and where they want to be. You go back to the Dan Sullivan strategic coach, right? 3 years from now, looking back, what would you have accomplished? So we want to ask them that about their business. How would your business look differently in order for you to feel like, boy, I've done a really, really good job building this, and I'm proud of the firm that I'm running. It's on the M&A support side for those who want to grow inorganically. So it's really all aspects of helping them become better and more successful entrepreneurs, along with sort of the basic table stakes, right? Just kind of doing all the baseline stuff that I mentioned, compliance and billing and all that other stuff. It's also helping them envision where they want to be and helping them get staffing. We help with staffing and HR, helping them build a blueprint of the next 3 positions they want to hire and eventually finding those people. So it's kind of a soup to nuts, and then ultimately monetizing them. If they come to a point in time where they're starting to think about, how do I protect the business? If I got hit by a truck tomorrow, can I protect the value that I built? A lot of times we'll step in there as an investor minority partner. So
where you're at now seems to me that it would be the result of a fairly complex evolution, right? This is not the typical career path where you sort of, hey, I'm going to become the back office for advisors effectively, and excuse sort of the broad stroke description. So how did you get to this point? What was your career evolution?
Yeah, so I spent 23 years at my predecessor firm as an advisor, and then running Cleveland, Ohio, and then a few states, and then ultimately the eastern third of the United States, and sort of developed there. And then sort of surprisingly and abruptly was exited from there. Different story for another day, a funny one and a good story, and I had a chance to start building this shop. And because I had traveled and had a lot of geography, my hope was just to build a great little firm supporting advisors in Cleveland, Ohio. And within 90 days of opening our doors, we had folks over from Merrill, all the normal suspect, Wells, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan. And I think we essentially just did what we said we were going to do. We did a good job in supporting them in the early days. They introduced me to other friends of theirs around the country from those same firms that were thinking about independence. All I wanted to do is share what I had learned, but these folks didn't want to do it on their own. And the first time we acquiesced and opened outside of Cleveland, needless to say, 100 and however many cities later, we've helped people go independent or supported folks who are already independent, and have built a kind of a neat business in the process of doing that.
Sure. So a lot, maybe not a lot, but at least a handful in my world, I see former advisors, former executives at advisory firms. If they leave, some percentage of them will gravitate towards the wholesaler or key accounts path. They'll leverage those relationships and try to represent, say, a non-traded REIT or some other sort of private fund manager and help them with distribution. Even if it's a sort of extremely asymmetric fork in the road, what kept you on the advisory side as opposed to maybe taking it a different turn?
Yeah, I love the wealth management business, and I love helping people become entrepreneurs. I was in Iowa yesterday, and one of our guys gave me this gift marking his day of independence when he started his own firm, and what that's meant to him and his staff and his clients. And it just felt incredibly good. When people look back at whatever modest role we may have played in them running and building a great business, and oftentimes businesses that are worth a lot of money independently, and the satisfaction that they've gotten for being able to control their own destiny, it's validating. It just feels good. There's not a lot of economic motivation at this point. Obviously, the enterprise is large, but I love what we do. I love the folks that we do it with. And I love the fact that we are not even back office anymore, really. We are, but we're more than that. We're not even just middle office, but we're front office. We're I spent the day, at an advisor's office, and we've got a team of 10 of us that when they're trying to acquire books or do sort of unique things, we're sitting there at their conference room table, making sure that those conversations go the best they can. And it's that level of engagement that I think is differentiating, helping them become successful and actually being there in those most important conversations to increase the likelihood of good outcomes. I just think, I think we're blessed. I mean, I think we're in a good spot. When I say we, I don't mean your shop or our shop. I mean, sort of the industry. We're in a great business right now. It's a little bit challenging. You and I were chatting earlier about M&A and how difficult that is, but I think there is a fork in the road. We've got a really old population of wealth managers and advisors, not a lot of talent coming in. It shocks me, actually, what a great industry it is and the opportunity and the autonomy. So I would just love more people to come into the business. So one of my challenges personally has nothing to do with our firm, is to start to going out and do more speaking at the university level and just let people know what an amazing career path this is and what great businesses they can build. I look at friends of mine who run successful businesses that are wealthy. And when I think about the overhead and the CapEx and all the equipment and infrastructure, and ours is mostly intellectual, property and investment. It's just good people, maybe technology spends, but you could build a really great business in this industry. And young people will have a massive opportunity because roughly 50% of advisors and wealth managers will be gone in the next 5 to 7 years. They're going to be retiring out. Not a lot of talent coming in behind them. And that paradigm that you talked about, and you're exactly right, by the way, 60 to 70 advisors looking to buy for every seller, that's going to flip. And if you're there, and if you're informed, and if you're well capitalized, I think you're going to see a massive not a consolidation, but a concentration. So there are more and more RIAs out there, but fewer and fewer very quickly are getting really big. And if you're well positioned, there's room for people to be part of that, that concentration that's developing.
So you mentioned speaking more at the university level to the youngest generation coming out of school. In your experience, do you have a prescription in terms of academic pursuits that would best prepare you for the career?
I think it's a mindset. I think people can have various education backgrounds, various ethnic backgrounds. There are not a lot of minorities in our industry. I mean, I think that's a great opportunity. But I really think it's more drive, and when I speak to young folks today, I had a kid who's a student nearby, and he came in, he said, someone recommended you, and I'll talk to anybody. It could be any size advisor, any size firm, or any person who wants to spend 30 minutes. For young people, and I feel terrible saying this, and I feel old saying this, there's not a lot of initiative. He said, how do I look different? I said, just try a drop harder. Show up when you're supposed to show up, maybe stay a little bit later, suggest to somebody that you have bandwidth and you have the ability to do more than what they've given you. That in and of itself will make you look different than most of your peers, because people today, and God bless them, right? They talk about balance. I was with a firm 2 days ago, and they were talking about investment banking and how hard it is. People just won't do what you need to do. You used to be able to overpay them and grind them 15 hours a day. They don't want the pay now. They're willing to work less. And a lot of the investment banking firms and PE firms are struggling to find talent, because this young group, they're few and far between, the ones who are hungry enough. They're willing to grind at that level, despite the fact that they'll get paid twice as much as their peers. So it's interesting. Just a work ethic beyond someone's background or pedigree, I think would suit them really well.
Very good. So that kind of dovetails into, again, our experience and our interface with retail advisors. And I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit about how my perception relates to your perception of the same marketplace, right? So I am not, as I sort of mentioned before, I'm not going to run a business based on personalities. People can do that. I don't have it, right? Very, very black and white. Like, my academic background is physics. I'm a quant. And I'm happy to be that, right? I know my lane, so to speak, right? And so obviously, when you're trying to move somebody to a new perspective, to adopt a new service, vendor, otherwise, you have to thoroughly understand their psychology, understand the motivations, the frustrations they have, that would be the impetus for any sort of change, and then deliver that, right? So I understand that, right? But in my experience, with the most rigorous sort of research and extreme efforts to understand the psychology of the target audience, it seems that more times than not, and given the numbers that we've engaged, I'd say like 98% plus sort of have psychological blocks that prevent them from making decisions that would improve their station and solve the very problems that they will express are their biggest that they want to overcome. Lack of a better term, hard-headedness, right?
Yeah.
And so you talked about that a little bit in terms of the false beliefs with respect to just making the step into the world of independence. And then once you're independent, recognizing the economic impact of outsourcing back and middle office activities, and even to your point, front office activities to an extent. This hard-headedness that I perceive, is that just a reflection of my own personality, or am I seeing something that's legitimately there?
No, you're spot on. And I'll use my own words. I'll say that complacency creates a hurdle that's higher than most people can jump. So part of it is hard-headedness, and part of it is the fear of change, and part of it is the complacency that, I don't necessarily love where I'm at, but it's not terrible either, right? So most people know that if they cross that bridge and can control more of their own destiny, things are going to be really, really good. However, there's sort of that fear of crossing the bridge. And now what people have today is a benefit of the last 10 years. It was smaller advisors that were going independent. When we first launched, the average advisor was $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in gross revenue. Then without any effort on our part, it was 600, 700, 800. Then it was $1 million. Now it's a couple of million. So it's very typical that the bigger and better teams are leaving today because they've seen smaller people cross that bridge and they survived and they did well. And clearly my practice is much more buttoned up than that. So that hard-headedness and or fear and or complacency is being resolved. The other thing I would say that kind of crosses the emotional side over to the quant side of the brain is a chart that I developed years ago and I still use today, is called the cost of complacency. Things would be better. You'd earn more. Your business would be worth more. But has anyone ever calculated for you the cost of complacency? And on one page, I show them with their own numbers, a 10-year spreadsheet that says, I know your desk is comfortable and your office is warm and it's heated and your car knows how to get there on its own. But what's it costing you to sit at your desk versus one of my desks across the street? And the larger the team, it could be 10, 15, 20, $25 million in cash flow and enterprise value at the end of a 10-year span. And when you calculate that, usually you get the same response. When somebody hits there like, holy crap, I knew it was significant, but I've never actually seen it on one page. So that's kind of grabbing the emotional and the quantitative side of things and relegating any lack of clarity and actually showing them one of the insurance companies or retirement, what's your number? This is your number. This is your number for the cost of complacency calculated. And by the way, if my spreadsheet's off, tell me, it's easy to adjust, And when they see that number, it just smacks them in the face. And a lot of times that's the wake-up call that people need.
So they will respond to numbers as long as the numbers are simple.
Absolutely, yes. It's on one page because they know anecdotally that they're going to have more control. These top-down mandates and cross-sells and checking accounts and credit cards and net new households, all this crap that, is somebody else's agenda, not their agenda. They know that stuff's annoying and they know that's going to go away. And what they don't really, and they also know that they do better, but when they see what the number is on one page, it's like, it's hard to refute. It's hard to refute.
Enough. Sure. I'm kind of torn here. So on the one hand, I kind of view most retail advisors as a monolith, right? That they all kind of share the same brain, but it's not really true, right? There are individuals and some are willing to think a little bit differently and engage in a little bit more of an innovative approach and require less sort of hoop jumping, right? From say a vendor's perspective, for lack of a better term.
I think you're onto something there. It's almost like the bell curve, right? There are those who will never leave. There are those who are energized and are leaving with energy and vigor and call those 20% on the ends. It's that bell where there's 60% that are sitting somewhere that you're describing now. And that's where not us, but firms like us that can help them take that journey, right? They're not going to go backpacking on their own, but if they've got one of those vehicles that come in tow and carry their luggage and give them they just make the journey a little bit easier, that they can be swayed to be amongst that crowd that would leave the monolith, that would leave the mothership and maybe do something independent. So you got the fiercely independent, those who will never be independent, but the majority will sit on that bell, intrigued, but probably wouldn't do it unless there's someone that can help and make it a little bit gentler or easier a journey.
So am I hearing you correctly to say that distribution within the advisor market is similar to any market, where you've got the early adopters and the never adopters, and then the bulk who just kind of sit in the middle and wait for somebody to go first.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And I think if you can make that journey easier, there'll be more, those people sitting on that, and that on the top of that bell will be more inclined to go. And the fact that they've seen other people do it. And remember, most of the employee model headcounts are declining. And those folks are all going some iteration of RIA and independent.
So that brings up a point with respect to our experience in the RIA space, albeit relatively limited. It's been a seller's market for a while, right? But some of the conversations of late are what you might expect. Markets for this year have been down. There's been a $58 trillion drawdown across equities and fixed income, including government debt. And those phone calls that the advisor dreads, right? Where the client is asking, hey, what are you going to do? And the advisors really don't have a solution. As FINRA would say, you cannot diversify away market risk, right? How is this sentiment or affecting the market as you see it?
Yeah, it affects it materially. If you're talking about the M&A market, it affects it materially. Because if I'm just coasting and my job's not super hard and I've got nothing but, tailwinds and support, and it's fairly easy to do. People are inclined to stay longer because they're clipping a coupon and making a good income. But in an environment like this, where they're not entirely sure how to manage a client's money, they're having lots of difficult conversations. Advisors who are on the fence sort of fall one way or the other. They either fall on the side that they're going to double down and really dig in, or others are just saying, man, I don't want to go through this again. I've been through it multiple times in the past. It's really, really hard right now. And they contemplate selling sooner than they might have otherwise if they had nothing but tailwinds. So it does have an impact. And by the way, at this stage, in the last, quarter or 6 months, we've had more flow across the country, and the industry has had more flow of businesses that are contemplating, for reasons like we're discussing now, a partial or full exit.
With that, again, dealing with the sort of the psychological considerations, we have solutions that have been designed and executed for decades precisely to deal with this type of market dynamic, right? And when we're engaging advisors, despite what you would think, again, from a marketing perspective, is an obvious visceral drive to mitigate. We don't want to have those calls with our clients. And if we could find a solution to make those calls go away, we'd grab it. But that's just not there. It seems like the aversion to those calls is still less than the appeal of finding the solution or working with the solution to remediate that. And the excuse that we generally get is complexity, right? It's too complex. I guess to your point earlier, like if you can give them a simple quantitative answer, like a single number, that's more palatable. It's sort of that leap is no longer a leap; it's just a step. So I guess that puts the onus on us to, again, present our material in a more palatable manner.
I think that's part of it, right? I think the other part of it is I don't think advisors look in the mirror often enough. 90% of them are fairly crappy asset managers. And I would include myself in that. And that's not what I do, right? I mean, most of them are good relationship managers. They're good financial planners. They're good at guiding, but they're not good asset managers, yet they think that they are. So the businesses that build the best businesses are those who wear one or two hats, not 20. And a portfolio manager is not a hat that 90% advisors should wear, because they don't wear it well. And when they recognize sort of their unique ability or what's going to drive success in their business, in many cases, they should be outsourcing that to shops that, as you're describing, have the capacity to do things more thoughtfully or do things better. And they actually do their clients a disservice. They associate value with asset management, when in fact, selecting great asset managers and great solutions, it's probably more their obligation than trying to be a great asset manager, because most of them aren't. Well, and that's not anecdotal. That's not anecdotal. I mean, it's factual. We can look at the numbers inside our shop in the industry. Most advisors are quite poor asset managers.
And that's the irony, right? Like, they are an investment advisor, and yet in our experience, we engage them. The way they try to decommoditize their firm and compete is by annexing ancillary services. Oh, I'm going to help with tax. I'm going to be a multifamily office. Oh, how about doing your job, your core function, a little bit better than your competition?
Right.
And communicating that. But to your point, they don't seem to give a shit.
Right.
Anyway, it's in the title. And again, it's not a crime if you are sufficiently self-aware of your limitations.
Right.
But to have the audacity to say, I'm a fiduciary, right? But yet the ego or the lack of intellectual wherewithal precludes you from making good decisions.
Yeah.
That is just frustratingly pervasive for us.
Yeah. It's the industry. Yeah. And it's how they label themselves and what they think their job is. And, I think I've said enough, but I think most advisors would serve their clients far better to align with folks that do only asset management and do it deeply versus that being one of 7 or 8 hats that they wear, because they won't likely wear it well.
Yeah. And look, so to be clear, when we engage in RIA, we are not soliciting any particular solution. We're selling one idea, which is to take a merit-based approach, right? The only difference between investing and gambling is that with an investing, the probability of loss exceeds the probability of gain.
Right.
And investing, theoretically, the probability of gain should exceed the probability of loss.
100%.
100-year-old grandmothers who go to the casino get this shit intuitively, right? If you're feeling aggressive, they're going to play slots. If you're feeling a little bit scared, you might be on blackjack or black and red on roulette, right?
Exactly.
But if you ask 999 out of 1,000 financial professionals, what is risk? They'll give you the fucking Brook Trout look. They've got no idea, right? And then they'll begin talking around it, right? They'll start talking about variables that may or may not contribute to risk. They'll start parroting the FINRA heuristics. Oh, diversification, right? 60-40, whatever, right? Treasuries are risk-free, even though they were downgraded 8 years ago, right? So, yeah.
I sat down with one of our partners today, and he started off by, and I haven't seen him in a while, great guy. He started off by saying modern portfolio theory is dead. The major asset classes are correlated, and if you're not thinking more thoughtfully than that, you're inadvertently screwing your clients. So,
yeah. Well, and the irony, look, so there's tribalism associated with everything. I certainly appreciate and understand that retail advisors want to sort of be good members of the fraternity, right? But you don't have to go too far to look at institutional portfolios.
right.
They're not setting
right.
a 60-40 allocation,
Right.
right? And so my point is, what we're trying to sell financial advisors is risk is a number and it can be measured, right? And it takes 2 relatively simple things. You have to look at a full market cycle worth of data. So 2008 counts, right? And you have to look at all 4 statistical moments, which means alpha and beta aren't it. They tell you more about opportunity cost than they do about anything else, right? 3rd and 4th order considerations like skewness and kurtosis are have to be considered to have an accurate view of risk. And the amount of disinterest, again, is just fucking appalling to me, because that is your job. Like they can't prove, they couldn't go to court and prove that what they're putting their clients in is better than blackjack.
Right.
Couldn't prove it. Right. So anyway, our point is we try to sell advisors on a merit-based approach. And we say, look, you allocate to the best quality assets you can find, no matter what they are, where they came from, what their asset class is, doesn't matter, right? And, if that's us, great. If it's not, great. But again, just getting advisors to think in a merit-based capacity is a challenge for me. And I know that from a marketing and sales perspective, I've got very limited patience, right? And that probably comes through loud and clear. But to what extent are you no longer expected to be a fucking child, right? And now I'm kind of cornering you, Jeff, because like you're the consummate diplomat. This is your market. We want to be nice to them. But I think there's something to be said for tough love as well, right? And it by no means is my position. Like, look, I can call out the limitations of the zeitgeist amongst retail advisory without indicting the industry at large. And what I mean by that is retail advisors are the gateway to financial services for the public, right? If you ask most advisor clients, I think a lot of them would tell you that the services they're getting are largely bullshit, but they're going there because they don't have an alternative, right? And on the other side of the coin, advisors are complaining about fee compression, right? The commoditization of the industry. Like, and then we talk about in first world countries, there being a lack of holes in markets, right? Everything's already plugged. There's no opportunity. This is the biggest hole that ever existed in anything, right? Finance is the biggest sector in the world, and you've got trillions upon trillions of dollars in retail money, desperate for solutions that pass the smell test. And advisors like, I can't do anything. No. There's nothing I can do about that, right? And so I'm not sure where I was going with that diatribe, other than to say that self-reflection, right? If you actually do take your fiduciary relationship seriously, right? If you do want to differentiate your firm in a substantive way and develop quick trust, right? People, a lot of advisors talk about like, we've got to go to dinners and golf and have lunch and learns and all this stuff. It takes a long time to develop trust. Yes, it takes a lot of time to execute the psychological manipulation and deliver the bullshit required to overcome the crap that you're delivering, right? But if you're a substantive person, people feel that immediately. And I can tell you firsthand, that trust hurdle goes down very quickly, relatively speaking, right? I think it's important, at least for me, to juxtapose the different perspectives and personalities, right? So you are the consummate diplomat, Jeff. Like, you're buttoned up, you're seasoned, you speak to your audience. Whereas I'm coming in from an aggressive sort of foreign perspective, relatively speaking.
Hang on, I apologize.
Sure.
Somebody's been knocking on, I think I'm supposed to be facilitating something at 10:30.
Go ahead.
So I'm guessing people have been sitting on the line waiting for me. But
ahead.
I want to continue this over a cup of coffee in Naples.
Very good. Good to chat with you, Jeff. You take care.
Thank you so much, guys. I'll reach out. I'm going to make sure we get together for coffee. So
very good. Cheers.
Apologize.
As is often the case, those who need help the most are generally the least willing to accept it. Retail financial advisory is no exception. The institutional space, those managing billions of dollars, are generally well equipped with the skills to measure and effectively manage risk. Retail advisors who struggle to grow AUM and are caught in the fee compression environment of a commoditized business model need these skills more than anyone. Those with the intelligence, curiosity, and sense of independence to recognize this fact are quickly rising to the top of the industry.